Hello, and welcome to the YouTube channel 3D Printing for Geoscience. I'm Morrison Nolan, a PhD student at Virginia Tech. So now that you've learned how to design 3D objects, the question naturally arises, how do we print them? That's a complicated question, and to answer that, you have to make several decisions, like what kind of print do you want to make, say in plastic, resin, metal, or some other material. And after you've made that decision, you have to process your model into a file that the printer can read and utilize. In Dr. Mark Michel's lab, we have two Formlabs 2 printers, which are both UV resin printers. And using the free program Preform, you can take STL type files and convert them into something that the printers can handle. So let's demonstrate how you would do a print job on such a printer. The first thing that you do is plug the printer's USB port into your computer. You could do this via a wireless connection, but this also works. Now you open Preform. And so now that we've opened Preform, we are greeted with this box which asks us to set up the initial printer and material settings. Now, the printer that I have it connected to is using the durable material, and it is, as it suggests, volume 2. So now we choose the thickness that we do for layer prints. Thinner thicknesses produce higher detail, but print more slowly. And for this material on this printer, we can either do very thin or very thick. So in this case, we are going to go with the 0.1 millimeters. So now that we've applied, we're given our print base. Now you need your objects. So to import your objects, you go to File, Open, and you navigate to the objects that you want to add. In this case, I want to add all three of these objects. We're going to ignore that for now. And I actually need a second one of that object right there, so I'm going to import another of those. Now the important thing is to arrange these. As you can see, some of these overlap with each other, which would make it difficult to print, and some of them are under each other, which will make it difficult to print. Now there's a couple of ways of handling that. We could, for instance, use the automatic layout features here, which that works, but that's not really what we want it to do. So instead, I'm going to manually move these into a configuration that suits me. And you can navigate which view you're looking at via this arrow button. So that takes you looking at the side, and you can use this to manipulate the angle that you're turning it to. Now you'll notice that will automatically flatten against the bottom there. We're going to do the same thing with this object, but instead of doing it that way, we're going to use this tool where you can manually select it. That was not what I wanted it to do, and sometimes it takes you a couple of tries to figure out the way that you want it to go. Let's try Orient Y instead, just to give you guys an idea of what it looks like. And that is what I want. Now let's again look at the top so we can understand where things are or are not. That object I want to print vertically. But I want that screw at the bottom, so we're going to have to flip that 180. I've organized that part in the bottom. Now comes one of the more difficult parts, and that's adding the supports. In that supports are columns of resin that the printer will add in order to make sure that the shapes don't sag and thus deform during the print job. So we're going to go by this one object at a time to generate supports. These two we're going to print directly onto the base plate, which will take a little bit of red. So we go to the support button there and we click generate selected after we click on build platform. And in this case, you'll see that actually does not need any supports because of the way that the object is produced and the way that it's laid out. Actually am going to move that object since I think it's a little bit close to the edge there, and that might be a issue when printing. So now let's generate supports for this screw. Again, we're going to print directly on the build platform. So let's generate selected. And you can see the few supports that it built that it feels necessary for this. This third object is going to be a little bit more difficult to build support for. In part because you can see that hole there is a long threaded internal feature. I don't want to put many supports in because I'll have to remove them in order to have the screw function properly in there, which would be very difficult. To accomplish that, what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the internal supports feature and then generate selected. This will take a little while to generate, but once it is, we'll then use another feature to identify the areas that it thinks will have trouble printing. It can take a moment or two. While we're waiting, take a look at that printability feature. When this finishes loading, we're going to click on it and turn it on so that way we can see in red the areas that it thinks will print poorly, so we can figure out how we want to add more supports. Still taking a moment to load, so bear with me a little bit. Let's show minima. That'll show us the areas that are difficult to print. We go into edit, and now we turn internal supports back on so that way we can see the areas that it thinks will be difficult. So you can see those areas in red are areas that it thinks won't print out properly with the level of support that we've provided. Now, these two square areas that I'm implying supports to, I don't really care what goes on in them because they're just empty space designed to reduce the weight of the model. So if I have to leave some supports in there, no big loss. I'm going to discreetly add a couple of supports there and there just to play it safe, because it's far better to have a little error with an object that you can fix manually than to have to reprint something. So now let's apply. You'll notice that it already can estimate the print time of 9 hours. In my experience, this will overestimate it a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if this were a 7 to 8.5 hour job. So again, let's edit this to see where it thinks that there's issues printing. So it's happy with those square areas now, but it still thinks that those threads could be a problem. Okay, so now that we're happy with supports, we can go ahead and click this button. It'll take us to the printer. So now we can select the printer that's ready, in this case the organic gull printer, which is the arbitrarily generated name. And we'll just call this print job adapter. And we go ahead and it might take one moment. Okay, so now that the file is uploaded, the printer can recognize it. On the printer, you will see a button that says Print Now. We go ahead and press that, and we check to make sure both that the cartridge vent is open and that the build platform is clear and the chamber is closed. Once we're sure of those things, we press the Confirm button. You can hear that whirring now of the system getting ready to print. Ooh. And that's how you print using this. Now, after this is finished printing, what will happen is we will remove the build platform and then clean the objects in an isopropyl alcohol bath in a sonic cleaner. And then once that's done, we can remove the objects from the build platform and then stick them in a UV curing chamber, which the additional ultraviolet light there will make sure that all of the resin is fully set. Once we're confident of that, we can take it out, remove all the supports, and then we'll have a functional item. Neat.